see. All right, I think we're good to go today. All right, glad to have everybody here, and hopefully we'll get a few more in here in the classroom. We'll see, maybe there's people on the way. Glad to have you guys online as well. I'm starting almost on time. Shocking, right?
Well, you're usually on time.
I should be on time, but sometimes I'm not.
Well, I mean, 1 out of 10.
Yeah. Well, anyway, going on with things. My name's Norm Ellis, and this is the Adult One Bible Study class at Grace Baptist Church in Vancouver, Washington. Glad you guys tuned in online. And today we are back in Exodus. We were in Luke for the Christmas story, but now we're back on track with Exodus. And we're going to be in Exodus 14. And the title is called Power Revealed. And we're going to be looking at these three areas. The first point is the escape, and that's 19 through 22. And the second one is the defeat, 23 through 28. And the last one is the powerful one, 29 through 31. And our main point that we're going to be looking at today is believers, Christians, should make sure they and others find rest. So I'm in favor of rest. How about you guys? I like rest. Yeah. So let's have a word of prayer, and we'll jump right into our lesson, and maybe we'll actually finish early. Ooh, we'll see about that. Heavenly Father, I thank you again for this time we have to study your word. Your word is precious to us, Lord. I just pray that you'd open up these words from so many years ago, Lord, in the book of Exodus, and see what we can learn about your nature and about your love and your power, Lord. And I just pray to be with those that are on their way here. Keep them safe. For those that are sick and away from us traveling, just keep them safe as well and watch over them, bring them back to us, and help those who are sick to get well. And just be with our pastor in the hour following and as he brings the message. And thank you for all you've done in your son's name. Amen. Amen. All right. So this is back into the area we were before, and this is an exciting time. If you were to pick an Old Testament time, if you had a time machine, you could go into that thing and pick an Old Testament time to go to. This might be one of your top 10, might be one of your top 5, I don't know. We're talking about the Israelites crossing the Red Sea and what happened with all that. It's quite an exciting thing.
If you knew what was to face them, though.
Well, yeah, that's true. Hey, would you like to do a verse for me?
I certainly would.
All right. I think I gave him number 3, so we got number 1 and number 2 still. Which would you like? You're taking a long one. You're so sweet. I'll do number 1. I'm number 1.
My whole life I was waiting on door number 2.
Number 2, yes. That's where the zonk will be. All right. So in your handouts today, you should have seen. There's my handouts. You should have seen on handout number 2, which is page 3, if you go through and count the pages. Picture. Now this is the color version. You got the black and white version in your handouts. See this one here? It's really quite striking. But when you look at the black and white, it doesn't look as well. But how many of you remember on the top one watching the 10 Commandments? Cecil D. DeMille's with Charlton Heston. You know, we see it almost every Easter. I don't know why it's an Easter tradition. Well, I know why, because Passover, but it's always on Easter, at least once or more. And the bottom one, maybe you do recognize that bottom picture. Do you recognize that one?
Yeah.
Oh, you do? Okay, how about you, Steve? Do you recognize that bottom picture?
A tiger on a ship.
On a boat, a little lifeboat. Yeah. Well, you'd probably recognize it if you saw the movie. I did not see the movie.
Oh.
I've heard of the movie. It's called The Life of Pi. The Life of Pi. It's kind of a philosophical movie. It's about this person who's on a lifeboat, and on this lifeboat is also a tiger. Well, the tiger's got to live, so you know that the guy's thinking, when's that tiger going to eat me, right? And so I've never seen the movie, so I can't speak to that part of it. But we're talking about today, with our introduction at least, to get us thinking about things, is what it took to make it look like the Red Sea was actually dividing here. And it was quite striking at the time this was filmed. I think it was in the 50s. I'm not positive. I have to look it up. I think it was 56. Anyway, but when people saw that, they were amazed. Now today, it's rather Bush League when you talk about special effects, right? if you watch the movie, it's not as spectacular as something maybe we've seen lately. Now this one below here, this is a study of contrast. This is a more modern movie. I think it was 2000, I want to say 7, but it might have been 12. I don't remember now. I wrote it down somewhere. And about 85% of the film shot with this tiger was CGI, computer generated image. It wasn't real. It was a fake. It was a deep fake, you might call it, right?
After I watched it recently, Jesse gave me a different outlook on that.
Yeah.
That all the things he experienced on that ship were only imaginary to protect his mind for
could have been
for months.
Yeah. Could have been. Isolation will do that to you. Tom Hanks did a movie about being stranded on an island, and I forgot the name of it now. But it showed quite interesting what he had to go through to not go totally bonkers. He went bonkers, but not totally bonkers. It was not shipwreck. What was it called? What was the name of that movie?
Well, I know he found a soccer ball.
Yeah, called it
Wilson, because it was a Wilson.
Yes, it was.
Called it Wilson. Yes. Anyway, but that's we're going on a different track here. We're Castaway. That's it. Yeah, Castaway. Anyway, but the CGI involved here was quite striking, and this was quite rudimentary. I guess what I heard was to do that special effect, they used Jello or gelatin, some sort of gelatin, to make it look like water was going back, and then they play it with these guys in the foreground. Foreground? Foreground. And this would be playing on a screen or something in the background. So it looked quite interesting, but today's not as up to date as other things are. So let's look at what they were talking about here. The picture of Moses parting in the Red Sea. Now, actually, it wasn't Moses. It was, of course, God.
But that God was able to make the ground dry
rather
than mud.
Yep.
It was dry, and they walked.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing, when I was looking for images online, how many images show Moses in like ankle-deep water and mud.
Oh.
No, that's the Bible knows nothing about that, right? Anyway, that particular movie, at the time, received 7 Academy Award nominations in 1957, and it won the Best Special Effects category. Best Special Effects. Mm-hmm. You look at that, you almost have to smile compared to what they got nowadays, right? But the scene where God parts the Red Sea was groundbreaking at the time. By comparison, we look at this movie, The Life of Pi. It received 11 Academy Award nominations in 2013, so it must have been a 2012 movie. And it won 4 of them, including the Best Visual Effects. Almost 86% of the tiger scenes used CGI, not even real. Anyway, in our handouts on the first page, intro paragraph, a little bit more on this kind of stuff. Alfred Hitchcock was a master of suspense and was known for his groundbreaking special effects. One of his better known effects was in the movie Foreign Correspondent. He sent a camera even closer to the surface of the ocean. Then he rear projected that ocean scene onto a screen in the room set up like a cockpit of an aircraft. The effect gave the illusion that the plane had crashed into the ocean. I don't recall that Alfred Hitchcock film.
Which one?
It was called
Lifeboat?
Foreign Correspondent.
Foreign
Correspondent. But apparently had some interesting special effects there as well. Anyway, it goes on to ask you, what movie do you remember profoundly impressing you because of those kind of special effects? Any in particular?
Psycho and Jaws.
Psycho. Now, I don't know what special effects Psycho had, but Jaws had some special effects. I know that.
Flashing red.
Yeah. You hear that all the time about the shower scene.
But that was actually filmed in a shower, I guess.
With something pouring down.
Yeah. Well, okay, that was Imitation Blood. Yes.
Yeah.
We won't get into that too deeply, but I like the other one you said, Jaws. Jaws used what? A real shark?
No.
A big mechanical shark. And I've seen some pictures of them playing around, and one person would be laying in the jaws of the shark like this.
Oh.
They were goofing around. Took some pictures of this mechanical shark when they were doing filming, I guess.
Fantasia.
Fantasia. Now that's an animated one, but it definitely had some really neat effects in it as well, didn't it?
They had to create new special effects and artistic.
It was way ahead of its time. Another one, Disney genre, would be Mary Poppins.
Oh,
That was actually real actors interacting with animation. So that was a special effect too. It was quite groundbreaking. Anyway, I think of also Star Wars, Star Trek, all these kind of things.
Old Chinese kung fu martial arts movies.
Special effects, they pulled their punches a lot.
Flying through the air from treetops.
Yeah. That's a cool effect too, if you can do it. Anyway,
Wires.
so we see these kind of things, and do they impress us? Sure they do. The first time or two, and 3 or 4, and then after that it's sort of like, But anyway, what were the effects, and how did you feel in seeing it? When I watched the first time, I watched some Star Trek in the theater. Oh wow, that was impressive, And later on, Star Wars was quite interesting. There was a scene in one of the later ones where the bad guy was trying to kill the good girl, who was the new up and rising person of the Force, and she was doing some backflips all like this on this old ship in the middle of a giant storm. It was quite impressive. But anyway, those kind of things can really impress us when we see them.
One of those Star Wars movies too had that worm crawling.
Oh yes!
Oh,
that was one of the first movies after the series.
Yeah.
It was The Wrath of Khan, it was called.
Yeah.
And actually it's one of my favorite ones, except, that part's kind of gross, but that's part of the storyline. That was a good one too. Anyway, Hollywood has spent millions of dollars showing events in the Bible. Can you tell me some of the events in the Bible you have seen?
Esther.
Okay, good.
Scene?
What scene?
What
not
scene?
scenes. What movies have you seen based on the Bible?
Oh, Chosen.
Chosen, good. Of course, we talked about the 10 Commandments already, right?
Oh yeah.
And we just finished Christmas. There's the Nativity. It's
Oh.
one of my favorite Christmas movies is the Nativity, even though they still have the wise men coming the same night as the baby was born,
yeah.
which was also the same night they actually made it to Bethlehem, which all those things are kind of, I'm not going to get picky about it. It was still a great movie. But there's a lot of those kind of movies, right? But God performed miracles without special effects. He's in charge of nature. He's in charge of all these things, including an event that crippled a world power and saved the nation, just finding its footing as a people. So we're going to look at this exciting time of the Exodus, and now we're getting to the nitty-gritty, the leaving, the exiting, if you will, of the enslavement. So we're going to look at these verses here, and the first one is called the escape. The escape. Ta-da! And verses 19 through 22. But before that, I'm going to read the prologue area, if you will, so we get a little taste of what's happened right before this. Okay. So in chapter 14, verse 1, it says, "Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Tell the sons of Israel to turn back and camp before Pi Hahiroth, between Migdal and the sea, and you shall camp in front of Baal Zephon, opposite it by the sea." Now, just a little background. They have had the plagues, right? And the last plague was the killing of the firstborn, right? And they had the Passover meal, and they were prepared to leave, right? And they left. And it says that they left in a military fashion. In other words, they were probably in columns to orderly go out through. And they did have some weapons, very rudimentary weapons, because they were slaves, but they probably had weapons that they either made themselves or they took from the Egyptians, because they were able to pillage the Egyptians. And so they leave. And they leave and they go, and this first two verses I read, God has them camping right by the sea in a certain area. It says, "For Pharaoh will say to the sons of Israel, they are wandering aimlessly in the land. The wilderness has shut them in. Thus I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will chase after them, and I will be honored through Pharaoh and his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord." So Pharaoh, at the last plague, where the firstborn left, he ordered them to leave. He ordered them to leave, and they did. And so but he has a change of heart now, it says. So when the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his servants had a change of heart towards the people, And they said, "What is this we have done, that we have let Israel go from serving us?" So he made his chariot ready, took his people with him, and he took 600 select chariots and all the other chariots of Egypt with officers over them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and he chased after the sons of Israel as the sons of Israel were going out boldly. When the Egyptians chased after them with all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, his horsemen and his army, they overtook them camping by the sea, beside Philhathroth, in front of Baal Zephon. That's hard to say those words. As Pharaoh drew near, the sons of Israel looked, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they became very frightened. So the sons of Israel cried out to the Lord, and then they said to Moses, "Is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness?" There they go whining again, right?
It didn't take them long.
No. "Why have you dealt with us in this way, bringing us out of Egypt? Is this not the word that we have spoke to you in Egypt, saying, 'Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians'?" Now, weren't they crying out to the Lord for relief? Oh, anyway. "For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." So this is the preview of the verses we'll be reading. And just a real quick thing here. I was interested when they talked about chariots. That's a lot of chariots, by the way. 600 select chariots, and then all the others. And so on page 2 of my handout 1, page 2, talks about Egyptian chariots. And this is an interesting thing. The art of war goes through certain stages usually. And in today's world, one of the biggest changes was made in World War I, and then II really came out, and that was the tank. The tank was a new, improved way to do things. And it took a lot of people by surprise. And those who didn't have tanks, guess what? They lost terribly. So this chariot is like a tank. In a sense, it's a new innovation. It's a fantastic thing that will allow you to be triumphant over your enemies. So it talks about it in this little thing I wrote down here. And I'm going to read that as well. It says, "The chariots used by the Egyptians were pulled by 2 horses, and their wheels had 6 spokes." Just a word on this. The first chariots were basically wagons, and they were solid discs, and they were very inefficient, but they were a platform, and you could go a little faster, maybe a little further, because you got horses pulling you, right? It says most Egyptian chariots, and these were vastly improved by that. They had just 2 wheels, and they were spoked, which means they were quicker, more nimble. It says most Egyptian chariots carried a crew of 2 men, a driver whose main duty was to control the horses, and a fighting warrior, usually skilled as a spearman and as an archer. And by the way, an archer on a chariot would have an advantage because they used these long bows. They didn't have compound bows back then, so you could get a lot more power the bigger the bow. So when you're on a chariot, the bow, and you're shooting it, the bow would extend down beyond the edge of the platform of the chariot, which means you could have a bigger bow, which means you could shoot further and harder. And that was a big also thing. You could also, well, anyway, I'll go on further here. Anyway, the fighting warrior was skilled as a spearman and as an archer, and with a sword as well, by the way, whose concern was to fight the enemy. Chariots were effective for their quickness, mobility, and strength, which could not be matched by infantry, foot soldiers in other words, at the time. Chariots offered a more stable platform for the archers and could carry more ammunition than a single person could, a single horseman. The chariots formed an elite force in the ancient Egyptian military. On the field of battle, chariots usually delivered the first strike and were closely followed by infantry, foot soldiers, advancing to exploit the resulting breakthrough. Somewhat similar to how infantry might operate behind a group of tanks today in modern warfare. Because chariots were much faster than foot soldiers, they could also afterwards pursue and go after the broken enemy to seal the victory. They quickly became a fearsome and powerful new weapon across the ancient Near East. So when you saw chariots coming at you, and you did not have chariots, you were very afraid, because it was not a good thing. The Israelites did not have horses or chariots at this time, although they had served as Egyptian slaves. Possibly the people of Israel had departed from Egypt equipped with some kind of weapons, either made or bought or perhaps taken from the Egyptians. But their size and organization and a highly disciplined personnel of the Egyptian army made whatever they had as Israelites very ineffective. The situation created panic among the fleeing Israelites. When the Israelites perceived that they are being pursued by the powerful Egyptian chariot forces, they were terrified because they were trapped between the desert and the sea and the army, and because they believed that their situation was hopeless. So whenever there's a new innovation like this, you are at the mercy of those who have that, and that's what was happening to the Israelites. Now, where was I? I left off talking about the chariots. I know I did. I finished that part. All right, good. So they saw this happening. God had led them right to the certain place, and I meant to see if they had it in the map here. They don't know exactly where it happened, by the way. Let me see. Is it even going to show it here? Maybe not. I don't even see it here.
The Red Sea.
It's a small body of water. It's probably in this area here.
Yeah, some people refer to it as a reed sea,
Yeah,
but it's
became that over many years. At the time, though, it was an actual sea. But yes. Anyway, they were trapped, and it appeared that God had led them to that spot to be trapped and then slaughtered. So, would you be concerned too if you put yourselves in their sandals? I would be.
Well, they had just witnessed all the plagues that God protected them from, and you'd think that they'd have some memory of being spared.
So anyway, in these verses 19 through 20 I just read, did I just read that one? No, I was getting ready to read that one. That's right. My turn to read my verse. That's it. Escape is what this is called. It says, the angel of God who had been before them in the camp of Israel moved and went behind them. And the pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them. And it came between the camp of Egypt and the camp of Israel. And there was a cloud along with darkness, and it gave light at night. Thus the one did not come near the other all night. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord swept back the sea by a strong east wind all night, and turned the sea into dry land. So the waters were divided. It says the sons of Israel went through the midst of the sea on the dry land, and the waters were like a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. So you got some really interesting visuals here. If you think of it sort of like as the what were we talking about before? Oh yeah, the movies. You know, it'd be quite spectacular to see that, wouldn't it? Now, I think I misplaced one of my sheets. Oh, there it is. All right, now I'm back in order here. So, our first ones we just talked about, first verses here. What were the actions that God took in these verses? What do we see when we look at this? What did God do?
He took them to the Red Sea so that he could show them and the Egyptians his power. And even the Egyptians knew. They said it was Yahweh. It was the Lord of the Israelites, Lord, their God.
And if you look at us, we don't have an enlarged view of this area. But if you looked at where they went, it was not the logical place to go. God brought them to a certain spot where they would have no other choice than to depend upon God, right? And to see the glory of God. And then you're exactly right. This is something to show Israel and the Egyptians what God was going to do for them. And it was an exciting thing to be, but at the same time, you can understand why they'd be very, 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 very scared. They thought they were going to, that was the end. They're going to all be killed right there, right?
With sink or swim.
It says the angel of God. Now, when it says the angel of God, what do you think they're talking about there?
An angel.
Yeah, and a lot of theologians believe this angel of God was the same situation as at the burning bush.
Yeah.
And so they believe that this angel of God was an apparition of fire, the same kind of thing, and that that was what was protecting them. Was God had appointed this angel to do this. And so when the army was coming up, the vast Egyptian army was coming up, and here's Israel, and here's the Red Sea, and they couldn't go anywhere. And this pillar of fire that had been leading them moved to between the Egyptian army, and it protected the Israelites from the Egyptian army.
At first, probably the Egyptians were coming up and they were feeling proud and confident that, oh, we've got them trapped.
Mm-hmm. It always struck me as curious, knowing how superstitious the Egyptians were. And a lot of people back in those days were very superstitious. That's why they had so many gods, right? The god of the sun, the god of the stars, the god of the river, the god of the moon, all these different ones. They wanted to appease them because they thought they did that, then they have a happier life. So here as they are in front of this pillar of fire, and they're just they're not moving, they're not going back home. I would go back home. I say, can I go back home now?
Yeah.
But God had caused them to be obstinate, to be stubborn, Pharaoh. And if Pharaoh's going to say, you stay here and we're going to go after them, you're going to do it. And so that's what they did. They all night long, essentially, they stayed in that kind of situation. Let's see, what was I going to... So God moved from leading them to protecting them in a very, very visual way. This is something that Hollywood would probably never be able to correctly show, I think, because it would be astounding to see that. Anyway, what was I going to read? There was something I was going to read on this, because it talked about it pretty good. There's a biblical principle involved here too. It says God uses moments of weakness to bring Himself glory, to show who He is to people. This is on page 47. I'll just read a little bit of this here. God had led the Israelites to this specific place because He knew they would be completely defenseless apart from His defending them there. So this was, and over and over and over, we see that in the Bible, don't we? Where Gideon was supposed to raise this army. That's too many people. Take some more away. Oh, still too many people. Take some more away. Still too many people. Take some more away. Well, now you just got a handful, basically, to do what God said to do. And they followed God, and they won a great victory over the Midianites, I think it was. Anyway, so this is a biblical principle we see all through the Bible in various times of that. And so this is something that would show the Israelites that God is all-powerful. Even over the best army in the world. These guys ruled the world, and they had these weapons of war that could not be stopped, could not be matched, and yet they were stopped in their tracks. And there's more to come, as we're going to see this. As the Egyptian army got closer, what do you imagine they thought of that pillar of fire that separated them from the Israelites? What do you think they might have thought about that? What would you have thought if you had been an Egyptian soldier?
I would have been like you said. Can I go home?
Yeah, I would be scared.
Yeah.
I definitely would wonder, what are we doing here? What is that?
But Pharaoh probably thought, how dare they put that there?
Yeah, probably. Anyway, so it talks about now in the verses we just read also, they did not come near each other. So in other words, this separated Israelite army, the whole group, from the Egyptians. They didn't have much of an army, by the way. Moses then stretched out his hand over the sea. Now this should sound familiar to us. He stretched his hand out over the sea. In verse 16, I think it's verse 16. I don't think I read those verses. It says, but Moses said to the people, do not fear, stand by and see the salvation of the Lord, which He will accomplish for you today. The Egyptians whom you have seen today, you will never see them again. That's verse 13. And verse 14, the Lord will fight for you while you keep silent. Then the Lord said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Tell the sons of Israel to go forward. Where would they be going forward to?
In the sea.
Into the sea. Into the sea. So now, you see the huge army coming up on you. You see this pillar of fire, and you see the water. Go forward. What? What? So, in other words, prepare to leave and go in that direction is what is being told here. So, That's when they say, because there's no graves in Egypt, he's taken us away, right? But he says, tell the sons of Israel to go for it. As for you, lift up, this is verse 16. As for you, lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, and the sons of Israel shall go through the midst of the sea on dry land. As for me, behold, I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, so they will go in after you. And I will be honored through Pharaoh and all his army, through his chariots and his horsemen. The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord, and I am honored through Pharaoh, through his chariots and his horsemen. So Moses is told to do something, right? Do you think anybody else heard this command?
Probably.
Probably. They all heard it, right? So now here he is, and he stands up there, and he does what God said. And what did God perform? He put his hand out with the staff in it, I think, stretched it out over the sea, and the Lord swept the sea back by a strong east wind all night and turned the sea into dry land. So the waters were divided. And the sons of Israel went forward through the midst of the sea on the dry land. And the waters were like a wall to them on their right and on their left. So these are words that we can gain some insight from. And if I can find my thing for that. There we go, the Bible commentary. Had some interesting notes on that as well. So when it talks about the strong east wind, do any of you guys remember this Volkswagen that they made? It was called the Scirocco. You remember that one? How about you, Steve? Remember the Scirocco? Yeah. Well, the Scirocco was named after this wind. It was a very destructive, hot wind that would come up out of the east in that part of the country. And it's called the Scirocco. And it was almost always destructive. For example, God used a similar wind to send the plague of locusts swooping down on the Egyptians. If you look at Exodus 10:13, you'll hear that about that east wind. In Hosea 13, it's called the wind of the Lord, originating in the desert. Such winds can reach straight-line gusts of more than 100 miles an hour. And this one blew all night long. It wasn't just a short blast. It blew all night long, and until there was dry land to walk on. Another instrument was also provided, Moses' staff. But the Lord was the true source of the wind and the pathway through the sea. Now it talks about also a wall of water. It's this Hebrew word here, and I'm going to butcher this word, but it's called homah. And it indicates a large wall, like what would surround a city. Now they would build these bulwarks, they call them. And they'd be these like big mounds of material. It would cause the enemy to have to climb over them, and they would fire down on them, and then retreat back to their actual wall also. So they would have a series of these things that would protect their city or their fort or whatever it was. And that's what the water looked like. It looked like these huge mounds, this big wall on each side. And so you can imagine what that would be like to the Israelites as well.
And to think the wind didn't push the water only one way, pushed it both ways so that...
Yeah. And it says, likewise, the Hebrew word for sea, which is yam, it only applies to deep water here. Now, this talks to something Steve had brought up. Now it was really the Sea of Reeds. It was only about 2 feet deep. No, it wasn't.
No.
It wasn't.
It had to be a lot deeper than
Yes,
that.
it was a lot deeper than that. And matter of fact, today, in exploring that body of water, and they hadn't seen this stuff until they were able to go deep enough to do it. So it tells you how deep the water was. They have actually found debris on the floor of the Red Sea. Some of them appear to be pieces of chariots. Now, were these chariots from Egyptian's army? Or were they from a ship maybe that had chariots on board and got lost at sea? We don't know. But it's curious that they found debris like that there. And I don't know. So anyway, it wasn't a shallow marsh, as some skeptics contend. They were crossing between two massive ramparts of water on each side. Like I said, remember you've seen these pictures of castles in England and stuff like that, and they got these huge, giant mounds of dirt, and they also have the big wall of the actual place, and they would protect their castle that way. And so that's what these walls reminded them of. It reminded them of that kind of situation. So it was an impressive thing to see. So, what act of obedience did Moses do? he did what God said, which was to do what?
Stretch out your hand.
Yeah, stretch out your hand. And the water parted. And like I said, this was a large wall of water. This word homa, again, the Hebrew word for sea means deep water. So God worked for his people. He protected them, and he also made a way for them, making a way through the sea by standing behind them as well with a pillar of fire. So have we ever, in our personal lives, have we ever seen that God makes a way when there was none apparent? And that's what it was. There was no way we could do anything. And then God makes a way. Have you seen that happen in your own life?
Only once, really.
Okay.
But
Yeah, I have also. I've seen it happen too.
I was so sick, and
Mm-hmm.
well, people thought I was going to die, but
Yeah.
prayer and
Mm-hmm.
medicine,
Yep.
just.
Those things in life happen, and we can sometimes try to explain them away, but many times the only explanation is that God's hand was on you.
Watched a video clip, winter driving,
Mhm.
guys going down there in a semi-tank tractor, all of a sudden it jackknifes, and it's covering the whole road, and it's
Mhm.
coming right at them, at speed, and right at the last moment the trailer just swings back.
Yeah.
It comes back around, totally misses everybody.
Those things happen.
Yeah.
I remember not long ago now, it really, really impressed me. We drove up to Everett, and in my car, there's a tie rod that connects to the steering knuckle to turn the wheel. There was no indication of any problem. We got to Everett, traveling up the road like 60, 70 miles an hour, whatever the speed limit is. I went to the Safeway just a few blocks away. Got out of the car. I heard a funny sound. I didn't think anything of it. Went in, bought my stuff, came back to the car, tried to back up. The wheel was like this on one side, because the tie rod had broken, had come off, and found out later that it had not been tightened. It had loosened like this, back and forth, and caused the threads to wear down, and so it just popped out. If this had happened on the freeway,
Yeah.
my wife and I would probably be not here today. And so it really scared me how close we came. And I realized that God was over us, was watching us, making it so I would see it in the one spot it would be the safest, a parking lot. Not going down any roads, not going on the freeway, in a parking lot.
When I was driving.
You saved me from this. Now, how about some money to fix it?
Yeah, well, we charged that, but yeah. We found a Les Schwab that could fix it up for us, and we made it back home just right on schedule.
Yeah.
And so
Thankful.
God took care of us. And so these things happen in life. Sometimes you can easily explain them, but not when they happen over and over. It's just like you wonder, okay, what's next, Lord? What are you going to do for me next?
When I was driving down here from Alaska, I didn't have any problems between Homer and Skagway.
Right.
But when I got to the Skagway, waiting to get on the ferry,
Uh-huh.
I had a flat tire.
Uh-oh.
I picked up a nail someplace along the way.
I waited till then to go
It
flat.
waited till I was right there, and I was safe. And the minute I got off the ferry in Seattle,
Yeah.
I went to they pumped it up for me on the ship, and then,
Oh, that's nice.
yeah, and then I went to a garage, and that was
Got it fixed, and away you went.
that too. I felt like that was
God's watching
miraculous,
over you.
really.
Yep. All right, well, let's look at the second one now. The second point, we talked about the escape. Now we're going to talk about the defeat. And we're going to look at Exodus 14, verses 23 through 28. And for these next 6 verses, I want you to notice the action of the Egyptians, the actions of God, and the actions of Moses. Okay? And I think, Sharon, you got that one for me. Could you read that for me now?
Then the Egyptians took up pursuit, and all Pharaoh's house, his chariots and his horsemen, went in after them into the midst of the sea. At the morning watch, the Lord looked down on the enemy of the Egyptians on the army of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and cloud, and brought the army of the Egyptians into confusion. He caused their chariot wheels to swerve, and he made them drive with difficulty. So the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from Israel, for the Lord is fighting for them against the Egyptians." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, so that the waters may come back over the Egyptians, over their chariots and their horsemen." So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal state at daybreak, while the Egyptians were fleeing right into it. Then the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen. Even Pharaoh's entire army that had gone into the sea after them, not even one of them remained.
Wow.
But the foot soldiers stayed on land. It said, I think that was in the book, at any rate.
They might have. We don't know for a fact. The chariots were definitely leading the charge.
Yeah.
And so the infantry would have been right behind them. So any of them that were in that area probably got killed as well. We don't know for sure.
Well.
But yeah. So
it does say the entire army.
Yeah, of those who went in. Yeah.
Yeah.
So on the marker board I have some classic questions. If you're a journalist, you know what these are, right? Who, what, where, when, and why. And maybe you could add how. But we have these 5 categories here. So let's just look. Who are we talking about? I already mentioned who, so I'll give that one to you. Egyptians, God, and Moses, right? So what? What was the what of this? Do you think? Well, let me see. It was in general a confrontation with Egypt, wasn't it? Yep, Egypt was that was the what, if you will. There's a lot more to it than that, I know, but to sort of make it concise here. So where was this taking place?
In the Red Sea.
Beside and into the Red Sea, right? And what says when? The when of this, it was in what they call the morning watch. At night, they divided the way they looked at time. They divided the night into watches. And I can't remember. I think there was basically 3 of them. I might be wrong about that.
Yeah, it said in here anyway.
Mm-hmm. And this was the morning watch, or the last watch of night. And they think it was between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. It was before daybreak, right? So this is the last of the watches. And so this is when the Israelites were told to cross into the water, to go across the Red Sea. And what was behind them? The pillar of fire. The Israelites, yeah. The pillar of fire. So here they are, marching through, with the pillar of fire behind them, coming up with, sort of like as a vanguard, right? And now you're in the Egyptian army, and you're looking at this, and you're thinking, yes, I'll just go into the middle of the sea and follow them. Again, I would not do that. I don't know what strategic value that would be, because what is holding this water back? I would ask that question, but they did not. It boggles my mind. There's that word "boggle" there. But anyway, so this is what had happened, and when they were done, what did God do? He
let the water come back.
He let the water come back, didn't he? So what actions did God do to the Egyptian chariots in verse 25?
He jammed their wheels.
Mm-hmm. He caused the wheels to jam, to swerve, and to not drive straight. He made them drive with difficulty. So here they are in the middle of the sea with water on both sides. Suddenly they're not able to drive their chariots as well as they could. And probably, if you've ever seen what happens on a freeway when a couple of cars get an accident there or break down, what happens? A big backup? You probably had a giant backup of these 600 plus chariots.
Can you imagine Pharaoh's anger?
Yeah.
That his wheels wouldn't work right.
Yeah, and he's at the lead here. He's probably leading his group. That's normally what would happen in this situation. So he's up near this pillar of fire, and he sees behind him all this stuff jamming up.
Yeah.
I think at that point there, something probably dawned on them at that point there. But then it says the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the seas, so that the waters may come back over the Egyptians." So apparently he put his hand out to show God's power to part it, and once it parted, it stayed there. And then, bring the seas back by doing the same thing. And she does the same thing, and we see God's power And it returned to its normal state, so that at daybreak, when they could actually see better, they saw what happened. The Egyptians were fleeing right into this water that was coming back into that area, back into that channel of what had been made. So they were fleeing right into it, and the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. The water returned and covered the chariots and horsemen. Even Pharaoh's entire army had gone into the sea after them. Not even one of them remained. So we see a victory being made by the Israelite army, right? That's a trick question.
Israelite.
No, we don't, do we?
There wasn't an army.
There was no army as such at this point. Yeah, there was a group of people with some rudimentary weapons, but they weren't fighting. God was fighting for them. God was taking care of all of this. So God alone received the glory for this. He had built those towering walls of water to protect Israel, and now he released them to drown the Egyptian army. Apparently, God had stilled that east wind at daybreak so that Israel might have had light to see the collapsing walls swallowing up their enemies.
Can you imagine the arrogance of, all those miracles that had happened, the plagues that had happened in Egypt, and still the Pharaoh thought that he could win against God.
Well, not only the arrogance of the Egyptians, but the lack of faith by the Israelites.
Well, that's
because they were grumbling. Of course, I say that I would probably grumble if I was in that group, because here's the army coming, and I can't go anywhere.
But you knew. Yeah. Surely they knew that.
You'd hope they would. Yeah.
Yeah, God will help us.
So one of the things I also included was handout number 3. It's called God in the Wilderness, and it talks about how God delivered the Israelites in various points along the way in the wilderness. And this is, of course, one of the first ones. And so but it tells you some of the other things that God did also for the Israelites. So something for us to read later on as well. His presence, though, was with them at all times throughout that wilderness experience. Even when they were grumbling, even when they're complaining, even when they're rebelling, God's presence was still with them. It's an interesting thing to see. But anyway, this gives you some information about what God did. So we're not going to go through it all. It's just for you to look at later. It's quite revealing what God did for them. Let's look at is there anything question here? It says, how did God reveal himself to Israel by the Red Sea? Well, we see how he did it, right? In a miraculous way, in a powerful way, right? The best way that no special effects person could ever do that.
That would be so wonderful to see it. It would be unreal.
Yes. It says, no matter how chaotic circumstances may seem, always remember God is in control. God is in control. So how does it influence our faith to know that God is always in control? How should that influence our faith? Maybe I should say that. What do you think?
It should bolster your faith. You should.
Yeah.
But we too are kind of like the Egyptians who are the Israelites, because sometimes you can't help but have a weakness and think, oh, how is this going to work? But
well, Moses himself showed a faith that was a little bit lacking at one point. Whenever he was told to speak to the rock, and instead
he smacked it.
He smacked it.
Yeah.
And I would
matter.
Whatever way you say, I'm doing it. That's what I would have thought, but no. Yeah, he didn't.
Our human nature rears its ugly head at the most inopportune time.
Yes.
So we're going to do that. So we need to prepare ourselves to those times when we might feel that way, to remember God's still in control. Even though we feel like we're out of control, things are out of control, I can't control things, why is this happening to me? God's still there. God's still there. I think that's what we get from that. And for sure, that was a chaotic situation. And we see how God delivered them. Let's go to our last verse here, and it's called the powerful one. We've talked about the escape, about the defeat of the Egyptians, and now the powerful one. This would be verses 29, verses 29 through 31 of chapter 14. And these last 3 verses, I want you to think about is what was the impact to Israel on seeing what God did to the Egyptians? So think about that. Steve, can you read those verses for me?
But the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and on their left. That day the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the shore. And when the Israelites saw the mighty hand of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses his servant.
Wow.
For about the next week.
Well,
Yeah.
so, but these are some interesting things to read about here, and the impact to Israel. What was the initial impact? It was awe. Yeah. I would say an all-consuming awe.
Wait a minute, I've never seen the sea do that before.
Yeah. Here's this army, the best army on earth, and now they're all dead. You can see the bodies washing up on the shore. You know, you think we were going to be dead, and he kept us alive. You know, I don't understand how. You know, that would just be something that would be so consuming. I would just fall on my face if I was them.
And you would think that it would last the rest of their lives.
Well, yeah,
You would
yeah.
think.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
You know, patterns that we develop earlier in life are hard to break. And they had patterns of that. And,
Yeah.
and that's why God had to wait for that generation to die before he brought them actually fully into the promised land, by the way. We see that later on. We're kind of jumping ahead there.
That's because they whined and complained about going into it.
Yes. They weren't faithful. They weren't trusting. Only Caleb and Joshua said, yes, we can do it. The others said, no, we can't. We're like grasshoppers. We can't go in there. Okay, fine. Wander for another 40 years or whatever. And so it's important to note that only those two came into the promised land, Caleb and Joshua. All the rest had died off. Anyway, so note the word saved here used also. I think I saw right. Verse 30, yeah. It says, thus the Lord saved Israel, right? And the people feared the Lord after this, and they believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. So not only was it impressing them about God, but also God's servant Moses. Because they had been grumbling against Moses too as well, weren't they? So they're seeing that God has his hand on Moses as well. So this helped to shore up the support for Moses as well. Anyway, the Hebrew word translated saved I talked about already. It means to help, rescue, defend, and deliver. Those are some of the meanings. It says, while it is sometimes used to describe the actions of people in the Old Testament, like the role of the judges in Israel's history, more often it refers to God's action on behalf of his people against their enemies. It also is used within the Old Testament context of salvation as well. We also read that Israel feared the Lord and they believed the Lord. So what when you hear that word fear, what comes to mind when you hear that word fear? We use the word fear most of the time in our culture, our society, whatever, as I'm scared, right? I like watching these prank videos sometimes on Facebook. They run these little video clips, and some guy's dressed up like a tree, like a big bush.
Yeah.
As people are walking by, and then he goes, hello, and they go, ah! It's funny, but I can put myself in the shoes of these people. I'd be scared out of my wits if this thing I thought was a bush is suddenly talking to me and moving towards me. And so we see that fear.
And it's on fire and not burning up.
Yeah, well, that's true too. But that's one kind of fear. That would be called a negative aspect of fear, right? We could call it that way. But we also see that there's a positive aspect of fear as well. And I'm going to read this part here. It says, fear mentioned here is a healthy respect for God and faith in him. The Israelites also gained a new level of admiration for Moses as well. The Bible speaks of fear in both a negative and positive way. God's people were sometimes told not to fear, right? We hear that a lot. Do not be afraid, right? We see that in the New Testament as well. Whenever the angel visited Mary, and what did the angel say? Fear not, Mary, you have found favor, right? But there's times when we have that fear. But there's also this fear, what we want to call the positive fear here. It says, yet at this other times are commended because they feared the Lord, using the same Hebrew word here, just different aspect of it. It says here Moses referred to was that positive fear of God. Is a deep sense of awe before him, the equivalent of faith in him. Positive fear of God, sometimes called godly fear. Heard that before?
Yeah.
Blends also, godly fear blends into faith, gratitude, love, obedience, and worship. It's part of that component. It's a component of that. So we can have a godly fear. We should have a godly fear. We should be in awe of what God did back then. We should be in awe of what God's doing today. And we should be in awe of what God's going to be doing for us in the future. When he comes a second time to bring us home, that's going to be such an awe-inspiring event as well. So I ask the question, in what ways has your faith been strengthened as a result of seeing God's power? When you've seen God's power, you know something has happened because of God alone. Does that strengthen your faith also?
Yes.
It may be a fearful thing, but it still strengthens you. So that's the thing to remember about that. We use it only in a negative way in our culture, but there are positive aspects to it. And we need to have that good, godly fear of the Lord. So what would be the natural response to something like that? When you saw that happening, you experienced this fear of the Lord, this godly fear, what would be the next thing that would naturally happen, do you think, to these people?
I think you'd be worshiping that God. You'd be in fear of disobeying that God, you would think.
Well, that's true. Yeah, but you just were delivered. You were delivered from certain destruction. Wouldn't you praise the Lord in worship?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and that's what they're getting at here. Is we should remember that praise should be a natural thing when in response to that godly fear of what God is capable of doing and has done for us. We should have that same godly fear that would bring praise as a natural response. And that's what we see, by the way. I'm not going to read these verses, but if you were to look at chapter 15, verse 1 through 18, it is a whole long praise time. They're having a praise time of what God did for them. And one of these things is kind of I want to say it's not really a slogan, a saying that has come up from that time that we probably have heard of before. I think there's several songs written about that too. It says, the horse and his rider has hurled into the sea. Have you ever heard that horse and rider song or something like that? Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. But it's something it's usually in the culture of Christian cultures, you'll hear that term and all of you. This came from this episode. And the horse and rider has been hurled into the sea. It says, and Moses and the sons of Israel sang this song to the Lord and said, I will sing to the Lord for he is highly exalted. The horse and its rider he has hurled into the sea. And it goes on and on, line after line after line of praise here. So this would be the natural type expression. We should have that as well, shouldn't we? Some of the best times of worship I've been involved in has been when I recognized the power of God and I praised Him because of it. And that's something that they did as well. So we're running out of time here. They're going to ring the bell on me. So I wanted to finish early. I'm finishing right on time instead. Oh well. Let's go ahead and finish this up here. So in summary, we have three different things we talked about. It says, one is that God will lead His people and make a way when circumstances seem bleak. When it seems like there's no other way, God shows us that way, the right way. Second, we can know God is always in control. We may realize that, hey, there's the Egyptian army, there's the sea, but God's in control. I don't know how He's going to do it, but He's going to do it. And we see He did that. He'll do that for us in our lives as well, in those situations we see as there's no other alternative, but God will take care of it. Third, when we see God's power, what does it do for our faith? It strengthens it. Our faith should be strengthened. And again, praise should be the outgoing worship of that. So the challenge from our study today is to consider if there's any action that you believe God is directing you to take, yet you have been reluctant to act due to uncertainty. It was an uncertain situation for the Israelites, wasn't it? But God took care of them in that uncertain situation. He'll do the same for us. Sometimes we feel that, I don't think I can do that. When they first asked me to teach many, many, many years ago, I said, I'll try. I don't think I can do it. God said, yes, you're going to do it. If you'd known me when I was younger, you'd say, no, that guy would never do that. He can't speak. He can't do those things. But God does it. God does it. So we see that in our lives all the time. So a rhetorical question here. Rhetorical question is just something to consider. Don't have to answer it. But what do you need to do to make a commitment to move on with the next step? Think about that. If God is asking you, you believe, to do something that you might think you can't do, consider it. Consider that as something that God will bring you through anyway. It's a challenge for us that we can accept that God is in it, right? That we can have faith in Him to help us in that next step. Any comments, questions? This is great lesson, I thought. I just like I said, if I had a time machine, I'd go way back to watch this event, and I don't know if I could, that would be an exciting thing to do. Of course, there is no time machine. We have God's Word, and we can see in our mind's eye how that He would have done that. Yeah. It's an exciting thing. All right, well, we'll go ahead and close the word of prayer. We'll be dismissed, I guess. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this account, Lord, where you saved Israel from certain destruction. There was no way out for them except to trust in you. And you would show them your power. And you would show the Egyptians as well. When they saw their army destroyed in front of them, the Egyptians realized, yes, there is a God in Israel. There is a God, only one God that's all-powerful. And Lord, I just pray that we would also realize that in our own lives and live our lives that way. That we know that God, you are the all-powerful God. And that you can display that power in our own lives, Lord. When we face these kind of challenges, Lord, I just pray that you'd help us. Especially in this new year coming up, there's going to be new challenges as well. And just pray that you'd be with us during these times and show us those things you want us to do. And that you reveal yourself to us, Lord, answering our prayers. Thank you in your Son's name. Amen. All right. Great lesson. I thought you can't beat the material. And I appreciate you guys being there online as well. Again, this is Grace Baptist Church, the Adult One Bible Study. My name is Norm Ellis. Glad you could join us. Please stand by the next hour because our pastor, Matthew, will be bringing the message. And I know you don't want to miss that. So it's on the same YouTube channel. So be looking for that link. And God bless you all, and I hope you have a great week.
I would have never known you were reticent to teach. You've got a good teaching way.
Well, again,